I have never been able to make chocolate chip cookies, but please ask me to make croissants, macarons, three-tiered cakes. I've got you. But chocolate chip cookies, I'm so sorry, you are out of luck. And I always thought that I was a good baker. It's pretty straightforward, right? You just add your ingredients to a bowl, you mix them up, you add them to a pan, and you bake them. And by that logic, you should have gleaming chocolate chip cookies in front of you. But I never understood that baking was so much more than that until I spoke to Casey, who was a baker working out of her house, sending baked goods to her customers. I was able to finally make my chocolate chip cookies. And this is for people like me, those who want to learn how to make chocolate chip cookies. So step 1, gather your ingredients. While it may seem to be a relatively simple task of just buying your standard cooking ingredients of butter, sugar, brown sugar, vanilla, salt, flour, chocolate chips, and baking soda, but we should take some more time to discuss these in further depth. The one thing that Casey wanted to make sure was drilled into my head was the concept of butter fat. She said the quality of your butter and your chocolate are some of the most important things to consider when you're baking chocolate chip cookies. To produce an ideal cookie, your butter must have a high butterfat concentration, meaning that because of this higher butterfat concentration, a creamier, softer texture of cookie will be obtained. The quality of chocolate is also just as important. You want to make sure that your chocolate tastes good on its own. In the end, your chocolate chip cookie is mostly chocolate, so you want to make sure it has good chocolate in it. The temperatures of your eggs and your butter are also just as important. It's ideal to use room temperature butter when making cookies. This is because if you were to use melted butter to make cookies, you would not be able to whip air as intensely into it to produce a softer texture. So if you were to use softened butter, then you would produce the ideal texture for cookies. The egg temperature also matters. You want it to be a room temperature egg because you do not want to add cold eggs to your warm dough. It will mess with the texture of your dough. It will cause you to keep mixing it until the eggs are fully incorporated, and it may cause you to overwork the dough. Casey also says that it's important for you to produce good cookies. It's important for you to want to bake. Casey says, typically when you don't want to do something, people tend to cut corners and speed run through steps that require patience. It's also important that you want to bake things that you bake things that you want to make. So wanting to bake something that you want to make incentivizes you to make something delicious. Step 2, adding and mixing the ingredients to the pan. The order of addition of ingredients is very important in the execution of your baked good. Baking is a chemistry that deals with the reactions and interactions of your ingredients with each other. According to Casey, that's why order of ingredients matters. If you were to add your dry ingredients first, so your flour, your sugar, your baking soda, mix, and then you add your wet ingredients, your sugar, your butter, and your eggs, the consistency of your dough will not be correct. The correct order of ingredients is as follows: creaming the butter and the eggs together, adding the salt and vanilla, flour and baking powder, and then your chocolate chips. This allows for the ingredients to react with each other in the correct order, producing a perfect chocolate chip cookie. Now, you may be reaching for the hand mixer to cream your butter and your sugar together and mix the rest of the ingredients in the dough. And while, yes, you can use one, it's more recommended to use a whisk. A hand mixer is extremely helpful when you want to whip a lot of air into something to get a super airy and light consistency, but in the case of chocolate chips, it's unnecessary. So using a whisk is easier. Casey chooses to use a whisk, and she says that chocolate chip cookies are also a bit of an interesting case where it's recommended and easier for you to fold the flour and the chocolate chips into the dough. So when you add the flour to the dough is going to stiffen and become much thicker, and it will be more difficult for the whisk to deal with the mixing of the dough. So when you use a spatula, it will not be an issue to mix the dough. The spatula also allows for you to make sure that the flour sticks at the bottom and the sides of your bowl is fully incorporated into your dough. So you want to use a whisk to cream together the butter and the sugar, but then when you add your dry ingredients, use a spatula. So now you've made your dough, so it's time to prep our pans. So you take an ice cream scoop. It's easier to use those. And there are a variety of sizes of those, so just choose what you prefer. But note that the bigger the scoop, the longer that the chocolate chip cookies are going to take to bake. So you scoop all your dough to a lined baking tray with parchment paper, and you just cover them in saran wrap, and you just put them in the fridge. And it's recommended that you leave them in the fridge for 2 hours, but I like to leave mine in there for at least a day because it allows for the flavors to combine and interact with each other more to create a more cohesive flavor profile in the cookie. So step 3 is to bake. You spread out your dough across at least a couple of baking trays so that there's at least an inch between them, each ball of dough. And then you bake for around 18 minutes. Make sure that you keep an eye on the cookies. You want them to be golden brown on the outer edge and a bit paler in the center. It's important for you to bake your dough at least 350 degrees because the cookies need time to expand and truly cook before they begin to crisp up. If you cook them at a higher temperature, they'll become crispier. But of course, how you like to eat your chocolate chip cookies is what's important. So if you like them a bit chewier, underbake them. If you like them to be crispier, overbake them. And then after you bake them, just let them cool for a little bit. They just need to be warm to the touch, and then you can eat them. So once your cookies have cooled in and they're warm to the touch, dig in. And there you go. Your beautiful chocolate chip melty cookies are perfectly just made for you, ready to enjoy. Like I said, it's pretty simple, right? Just follow the steps: prepping ingredients, mixing, the cooling of the dough, and then baking the dough. And then you should have a perfect chocolate chip cookie in front of you. So grab a glass of milk, get comfortable, and enjoy.